don't know. The Declaration of Independence. What are the main ideas in the Declaration of Independence? In terms of vocabulary we're going to look at today. Declaration of Independence, Founding Fathers, Milita, Minutemen, and Second Continental Congress. So we're going to start here at the introduction. The colonists continued to debate over whether they should declare their independence from Great Britain. In this lesson, you will learn about the point of view of patriot leaders, such as Thomas Jefferson. These men wanted to separate themselves from British rule and form a new country. By May 1775, fighting between the colonies and Great Britain had already begun in Massachusetts. Each colony sent delegates to the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia to make a plan to fight the war. The Congress became the government for the colonists. It had to decide how to organize their troops and choose someone to lead them. This Congress also had another task. It had to decide whether to declare independence from Great Britain. By early 1776, the number of colonists who favored independence had grown. One reason for this is because of a pamphlet written by patriot Thomas Paine. The pamphlet he wrote called Common Sense. Paine argued persuasively for independence, presenting his argument in terms that the common man could understand. Soon, a decision was reached. The Congress decided to declare independence, but it needed to write a document that explained why the colonies had a right to be free from the British rule. It chose 5 delegates to do this, including young Thomas Jefferson. At a portable desk, Jefferson wrote the first draft of this document. And we can see here the caption for this picture. A committee of 5 men was put together to draft the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration told King George III why America deserved its own freedom. So we can see the caption for this image. This image shows a group of patriots engaged in a firefight with British troops at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The confrontation happened in 1775, before American independence had actually been declared. The Second Continental Congress. On May 10, 1775, leaders met in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. George Washington arrived from Virginia in his blue and tan uniform, while John Adams came from Massachusetts. Benjamin Franklin sailed all the way back from Great Britain to represent Pennsylvania. In all, delegates from all 13 colonies took part in the Congress. These men were soon acting as the new government. The First Continental Congress had met in 1774 to protest the intolerable acts. The Second Congress faced 3 key tasks. The most urgent task was to organize the colonies for war against the British. Just before the Congress met, British troops had fought against local Minutemen and Milita. The battle took place in the towns of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. The Congress knew that these colonies needed a more organized military to fight the powerful British forces, so it created the Continental Army and Navy. The next task was to decide who should lead the new army. Congress quickly chose a good soldier and a strong leader, George Washington. The third and hardest task was to decide whether to declare independence from Great Britain. Some patriots, such as John Adams, who strongly supported it, were ready to take this step. But there were still delegates loyal to King George III, who hoped the colonies could make peace with Great Britain. And we have some key words here on the side that I want to read before we move on. The Second Continental Congress, the meeting of delegates from American colonies that began in Philadelphia in 1775. Minutemen, a patriot volunteer who was paid and not trained to be ready to fight at a minute's notice. Milita, a body of mostly untrained part-time soldiers who did required military service and were available for full-time paid duty when needed. So now we're over here on Thomas Paine and Common Sense. And we see this is a picture of Common Sense, and it has a caption here. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense convinced many colonists to support independence. His simple style of writing made the pamphlet easy to understand for most colonists. Many colonists, too, were not sure about independence from Great Britain. They wanted the king to listen to their complaints, but they were still loyal British citizens. In addition, they feared that the colonies could not win a war against the strong British army. In the mid-1700s, people in Europe were exploring new ideas about science, government, and human rights. One key idea was that all the people should have freedom and fair treatment under the law. This time is called the Age of Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. Writers of the period published their ideas in newspapers, pamphlets, and booklets. These ideas spread through Europe and the American colonies. One man who believed in these new ideas was Thomas Paine. In 1774, Paine came to the colonies from England. In January of 1776, he published a pamphlet called Common Sense, which argued that people should rule themselves rather than be ruled by a king. America, Paine said, could show the world a better form of government. Common Sense reached many people because Paine wrote simply in words that all could understand. Many colonists still thought of Great Britain as their parent country, but Paine said that parents do not make war upon their families. The blood of the patriots killed in Massachusetts, he wrote, cried out that it was time to separate from Great Britain. He said that the colonists could defeat the British army. Soon, more than 500,000 copies of Common Sense had been sold. Never before had so many copies of one book been published in the colonies. People everywhere read it, including soldiers in the Continental Army. George Washington wrote that common sense was changing minds. By the spring of 1776, many people were ready to support a vote for independence. You see this picture here with the men all around the piece of paper. 5 men were chosen to create a document that explained why the colonies should be independent. One of these men was Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Here. Writing the Declaration of Independence. The Second Continental Congress began to move toward independence. On June 7, 1776, a delegate from Virginia proposed a resolution. It said that, quote, "These united colonies are, and by the right ought to be, free and independent states," end quote. The Congress agreed to think about whether to accept this resolution. It chose 5 men as a committee to write a document to explain why the colonies should be independent. John Adams and Benjamin Franklin were part of this group. A studious Virginian named Thomas Jefferson was also a member. Jefferson was only 33 years old, but he was already known as a fine writer and thinker. His fellow committee members asked him to write a draft of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson set up a folding desk in his room and began to write. For about 2 weeks, he wrote and rewrote his draft before finally showing his draft to the other committee members. Adams and Franklin made a few changes to it before eventually giving the document to Congress. For a few days, the members of the Congress argued about independence. Then, on July 2nd, the delegates voted to separate from Great Britain. The Congress spent the next 2 days carefully discussing the language of the Declaration. They voted to make a number of changes. Delegates from 2 southern colonies where plantation owners used slaves objected to statements about slavery. Congress removed Jefferson's statement that slavery was a, quote, cruel war against human nature, end quote. Some of the changes angered Jefferson, but everyone knew that all the colonies had to agree in order for them to become a united country. Finally, on July 4th, 1776, Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. Approving the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration approved a handwritten copy of the Declaration, knowing that this was an act of treason towards the king. John Hancock was the president of the Congress, and he warned the delegates that they must, quote, all hang together, end quote, or stay united. Benjamin Franklin replied, quote, we must all hang together, or assuredly, we shall all hang separately. So what he's saying is that they must stick together or they're all going to be hanged. End quote. The punishment for treason was death by hanging. When the time came for the Founding Fathers to sign the Declaration, Hancock signed first, writing his name in large, bold letters. His signature became famous. To this day, people call their signature a, quote, John Hancock, end quote. Then Jefferson and the other delegates signed too. Congress sent copies of the document to each of the colonies and to the Continental Congress. Excited patriots celebrated when they heard the news about the Declaration. A crowd in Philadelphia cheered when it was read to the public for the first time on July 8th. General Washington's troops heard it the next day. The soldiers and citizens tore down a statue of King George III and used the metal to make bullets. Patriot troops in Boston fired guns and cannons to honor the event. Everywhere, church bells rang and parades and bonfires popped up. Today, Americans still mark the birth of our country on the 4th of July. On this date, the delegates to the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. So we can see a picture here, and it says, after much discussion and a number of changes, the delegates signed the Declaration. John Hancock was the first founding father to sign it. We also have a definition right here of founding fathers. Founding fathers, the group of leaders who helped to establish the new American nation. We'll start here in this picture. The Declaration of Independence explains why the colonists wanted to form a separate nation. It details the complaints that the delegates had with the British monarchy. Right here, the Declaration of Independence. The delegates to the Second Continental Congress wanted to explain why the colonists wished to form a separate nation. The following excerpts from the Declaration of Independence are part of this explanation. The first excerpt tells why the colonists felt they needed to write the document. I'm going to do my best old colonist voice. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. The second excerpt lists some of the rights all people should have. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The third excerpt explains why government exists. It also describes citizens' rights if the government acts unfairly. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government. The fourth excerpt presents a general complaint against King George III. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having indirect object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Oh my gosh, y'all, the language used in these. Okay, we're on the fifth one. The fifth excerpt declares the colonists' independence. We solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. So we can see this picture here. We'll read this caption here. The Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington as the leader of the Continental Army. Washington was regarded as a good military strategist and leader of men. And we made it all the way down to the summary, right here. Lesson summary. In this lesson, you read about the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, It governed the colonies, formed an army, and picked George Washington as the new nation's military leader. It also took steps to separate from Great Britain. Thomas Paine wrote the pamphlet called Common Sense. He used simple language to argue why the colonies had to separate from Great Britain. The pamphlet swayed many colonists who were unsure about independence from Great Britain. Paine played a key role in convincing colonists all over America that declaring independence from Great Britain was the right move. Thomas Jefferson was a young man when he wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. He used some other documents as resources when writing, including a copy of Common Sense. The Second Continental Congress made some changes to the Declaration before approving it on July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence explained why the colonists wanted to form a separate nation. After declaring independence, the colonists started preparing their troops for war with the British. I believe after this was just a reading about Jefferson's conflict, ideas versus reality. And so if you would like to go back and read that, it's part of the reading further. It's going to be located in the PDF of the text that I've linked. And we'll probably stop there. And then if need be, I can make a part 2 where I can go back and read this. But I think that's all you need for now. Alright? Thank you for listening.